The subway platform was loud, crowded, and unforgiving, yet Mark had learned how to disappear inside it. He stood near the yellow line, his jacket worn thin at the elbows, one hand gripping the strap of an old backpack and the other wrapped protectively around his daughter Lily's small fingers. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting tired shadows on tired faces. This was New York at rush hour, everyone rushing somewhere, no one really seeing anyone else. Mark glanced down at his palm and slowly unfolded the money he'd counted 3 times already. A single $10 bill. That was it. His last $10 until Friday. He calculated silently, maybe a slice of pizza each, maybe a cheap soup and bread if he stretched it. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest, the quiet panic that came with being a single father who lived paycheck to paycheck. Since Lily's mother had passed 2 years ago, Mark had learned to live on hope, discipline, and promises he prayed he could keep. Lily leaned against his side, her head resting on his arm. She was 9, too young to carry the weight she already did, yet old enough to sense when things were hard. "Daddy," she said gently, "did you have a long day?" Mark smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not as long as some," he replied, forcing a lightness he didn't feel. He hated that she could hear the exhaustion in his voice anyway. The distant rumble of the approaching train echoed through the tunnel like thunder. Wind rushed through the platform, lifting scraps of paper and the smell of metal and oil. As people shifted forward, Mark's eyes caught movement near a pillar at the far end of the car. An elderly woman sat on the cold concrete floor, wrapped in layers that hadn't been warm enough for a long time. Her shoulders trembled. Not from the train, but from the chill. An empty paper cup rested in front of her, untouched. No one stopped. No one even slowed. Mark felt his chest tighten. He looked back down at the $10 in his hand, then at Lily, then back at the woman. Something deep inside him stirred, something uncomfortable, undeniable. As the train screeched into the station and the doors began to open, Mark realized this wasn't just another ride home. This was a moment that would ask something from him. The subway car lurched forward, metal screaming against metal as the doors slammed shut behind them. Mark stood gripping the overhead rail, Lily pressed against his side, her backpack resting between her feet. The air inside the train was thick, perfume, sweat, impatience. Conversations blended into a dull hum, but Mark barely heard any of it. His eyes kept drifting back to the elderly woman seated on the floor near the door. She looked smaller up close. Frail. Her hand shook as she held out the paper cup, its rim chipped and worn thin. The cup rattled softly each time the train jolted. "Anything helps," she murmured, not looking at anyone in particular. Her voice carried no bitterness, only fatigue, the kind that comes from asking too many times and being ignored too often. People shifted uncomfortably. A man in a suit stared at his phone. A teenager turned up her music. A woman pulled her coat tighter and looked away. The silence around the old woman felt louder than any noise in the car. Mark felt the $10 bill in his pocket like a weight. He told himself he couldn't afford this. He told himself Lily needed dinner. He told himself someone else would help. But no one did. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the train, "why is that grandma sitting on the floor?" Mark swallowed. "Sometimes people don't have a place to go," he said carefully. Lily watched the woman for a long moment. "Is she cold?" she asked. That question pierced him deeper than any plea for money ever could. Mark crouched down slowly, his knees aching as if they, too, understood the weight of the moment. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the $10 bill one last time. His mind raced, no dinner, no backup plan, no safety net. Just faith. He placed the bill into the woman's cup, the sound softer than he expected. Then he hesitated, took off his jacket, and draped it around her shoulders. "Please," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Take it. You need it more than I do." The woman gasped. Her hands clutched the fabric as if it might disappear. She looked up at Mark, really looked at him, and then at Lily standing behind him. Tears streamed down her face. You gave me everything you had, she whispered. Why? Mark shrugged gently, forcing a smile. Because I hoped someone would do the same for my daughter. The train rocked onward, but in that moment, something invisible shifted, something human, powerful, and unforgettable. The train continued its steady roar through the tunnel, lights flashing past the windows like fleeting thoughts. Mark stood back up, pulling Lily closer to him, suddenly aware of the emptiness in his pocket and the uncertainty settling in his chest. Hunger hadn't vanished. But it felt quieter now, overshadowed by something heavier and strangely calmer. The old woman sat still, wrapped in Mark's jacket, her thin fingers gripping the fabric as though it were a lifeline. She didn't ask for more. She didn't cry out for attention. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as if gathering strength she hadn't felt in a long time. Lily leaned into her father. "Daddy," she whispered, "did we do the right thing?" Mark hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think so," he said. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels scary." A few stops passed. The subway car emptied slightly, creating a pocket of silence that felt intentional, almost sacred. Then the woman rose to her feet. She was unsteady at first, but she straightened her back and turned toward Mark. Her eyes, once clouded with exhaustion, now held an unexpected clarity. "You didn't hesitate," she said quietly. Her voice was stronger than before. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't look away." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "It was just what anyone should do," he replied. She shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Most people don't." She reached into the pocket of the coat and pulled out a small, neatly folded card. The edges were worn, as if it had been carried for a long time. She pressed it into Mark's hand, closing his fingers around it. "Tomorrow," she said, her gaze steady and purposeful. "Go to this address. Be there at noon." Mark frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "You will," she answered softly. "Yesterday, I lost faith in people. Today, you gave it back." The train slowed as it approached the next station. The doors slid open with a familiar chime. Cold air rushed in. The woman stepped toward the exit, pausing briefly. She knelt in front of Lily, meeting her eye level. "Your father has a good heart," she said gently. "Never forget that." Before Mark could say another word, the doors closed. The train pulled away, and the woman disappeared into the crowd on the platform, leaving behind only questions and a strange, glowing sense of possibility. Mark opened the card. No explanation, just an address and a single sentence written in careful ink. Kindness is never wasted. He looked down at Lily, who smiled softly. "Daddy," she said, "I think something good is going to happen." Mark wasn't sure how, or when, but for the first time in a long while, he believed her. The morning sun spilled over the city streets, painting long shadows across the sidewalk as Mark approached the address scrawled on the card. His heart beat faster with every step, equal parts curiosity, hope, and lingering doubt. The building was modest, a low, brick structure with peeling paint, but there was a quiet energy humming around it, like a secret waiting to be discovered. Inside, the space was warm and welcoming. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, lighting up rows of tables and chairs. Children laughed as volunteers guided them through activities. A soft aroma of coffee and baked goods filled the air, and Mark felt the first genuine smile tug at the corners of his lips in days. And then he saw her. The old woman. Not frail, not trembling. Not broken. She stood at the front of the room, shoulders straight, her eyes bright and alive, a calm authority in her presence. The coat he had given her yesterday was folded neatly on a chair beside her. Her hands moved with confidence as she spoke, gesturing to a small group gathered around her. Mark stepped closer, trying not to stare, trying not to feel small in the enormity of the moment. He had expected gratitude. He had expected a quiet nod, maybe a smile. But this? This was something else entirely. She noticed him almost immediately, her gaze locking with his across the room. A flicker of recognition passed between them, and she smiled, not the fragile, hesitant smile of someone who had been ignored for so long, but a radiant, unshakable smile that carried a story of resilience. "Yesterday," she said, her voice carrying to everyone in the room, "a father gave his last $10, not because he had plenty, but because he had love." Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. His chest tightened as he tried to swallow the words. He had never imagined that such a small act could ripple outward in ways so large. She continued, speaking to the room, her words measured but full of conviction. "This program exists because of that act. It exists for every parent, every child who is struggling. It exists to show that kindness can be more powerful than despair." And then, as the room erupted into quiet applause, she turned back to Mark. "Come forward," she said. "You are part of this too. Your courage, your compassion, your love, this is what changed everything." Mark hesitated, then stepped forward, feeling a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Lily squeezed his hand, whispering, "Daddy, you did it." In that moment, Mark realized that sometimes the smallest acts of generosity are seeds that grow into forests, invisible at first, unstoppable once they take root. Mark stepped forward, still unsure if he belonged in the room that had already become a sanctuary of hope. The old woman, the woman who had seemed so frail just a day ago, handed him a plain envelope, the kind that could have held anything, but the weight in her hands told him it was more than paper. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice steady and calm. "It's a return on kindness." Mark's fingers trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were documents and letters, grocery assistance, childcare support, and even a referral for a part-time job. He blinked, barely able to take it all in. His eyes widened as he realized that the small, almost desperate act of giving his last $10 had not just touched a stranger, it had created an opportunity, a lifeline, and a community ready to lift him and Lily up when they needed it most. Lily tugged at his sleeve, her little face glowing with curiosity and excitement. "Daddy, is this really for us?" she asked. "Yes, baby," Mark said, his voice catching. He knelt to meet her eyes, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Because kindness always comes back." Around them, volunteers clapped gently, smiling at Mark and Lily. Parents exchanged nods of solidarity, children laughed and played, and the energy in the room seemed almost tangible, like the air itself was charged with hope. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt relief seep into his bones. The fear, the hunger, the constant anxiety of life as a single parent, suddenly, it all felt lighter. The old woman stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just give me $10, she said. "You gave me hope that the world still has people who care. And that hope is what changes lives." Mark looked down at Lily, who had buried her face in his chest. "Daddy," she whispered, "we're going to be okay." Mark hugged her tightly, the tears he had been holding back finally spilling. He realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about connection, about humanity, about the invisible threads that tie people together in ways we may never fully understand. As they walked out of the community center together, bags in hand, hearts full, Mark felt a deep, unshakable certainty, even in the hardest times, even when the world seems cold and indifferent, a single act of compassion can create miracles. And sometimes, just sometimes, those miracles come back to you in ways you could never imagine. Lily skipped ahead, looking over her shoulder with a bright smile. Mark followed, hand in hand with his daughter, carrying with him not just groceries or job referrals, but a renewed faith in the power of kindness and the unbreakable bond between a father and his child.